today, sitting here with these white hairs and these trembling hands, I decided to tell what my heart has been holding for so long, because there are things we try to forget, but we simply can't. I've seen a lot in this life, walked many paths, but there's one night, just one, that has never left my mind. That night, the night I ran away in the middle of the darkness, with my heart pounding in my chest, my legs shaking with fear and hope, but leaving behind the person who loved me most in this world, my mother. I remember it as if it were now. Her look, a look that said, "Go, my son, go live. Even if I stay, you need to go." And I went. I escaped in the middle of the night with a torn soul. And that's what I'm going to tell you about today. I was born there, in the mud, inside that dark slave hut where we only saw the light when the master allowed it. That place, even today, if I close my eyes, I can still smell it. A smell of mold, wet earth, old sweat, and suffering people. The air was still, suffocating. It felt like every breath was a struggle. We breathed deeply, and there came that taste of rust, as if the iron from the chains had mixed into the air. The walls were made of mud and sticks. The cracks let in the cold midnight wind, but never let in the light. Only darkness lived there with us. It was our companion every night, and even during the day. Just a thin thread of light would enter when the master ordered the door to be opened, or when the lady of the house came to check on us. And usually, it wasn't for anything good. I slept on the floor with the others. There was no bed, no mattress, just the cold ground, that cold mud that stuck to our backs and made our bodies ache. Even more when we woke up, my mother would make a cloth bundle, what she called a pillow, just so my head wouldn't rest directly on the dirt. It was the little she could do. The cold was an enemy. It came through the cracks in the walls, invaded every bone, every joint, made us shiver until our teeth chattered. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up with purple lips, and my mother would pull me into her lap, hug me with her thin body, trying to give me some warmth. She trembled with me, but she never left me alone. Hunger was an old companion, always sitting by our side. Some days we only had a piece of cassava cooked in water and salt, when there was salt, and on. Some days, not even that. I remember my belly growling, my stomach burning from so much emptiness. My mother would pick the greenest leaves she could find near the fence, make a thin broth, just to fool the hunger. Sometimes she'd pretend she wasn't hungry, just so I could eat her share. I knew it. I could see it in her eyes, that hidden sadness. The illnesses came quietly and took the weakest away. First came the fever, then the cough, and before we knew it, they were already carrying another body away from the slave quarters. There were no doctors, no prayers that could help. The elders said it was the master's punishment, but I always thought it was just life being cruel. I saw my friends, boys my age, dying without even understanding why. The floor of the slave quarters was dirty, mixed with mud, urine, and the blood of those who were beaten and collapsed right there. Some corners never dried, always wet, always with that strong, unbearable smell. We walked barefoot, and our feet grew thick layers of skin as if they were trying to defend themselves from the ground that hurt us with every step. I remember the animals too, the rats, the cockroaches, the insects biting us at night. There were nights when I woke up with my whole body itching, and my mother would run her hand over me, gently, trying to soothe me, as if her touch could be some kind of medicine. But even with all that, there was one place, just one, where I felt safe, in my mother's lap. When she pulled me close, stroked my hair, whispered made-up stories just to help me fall asleep. She spoke of distant lands, of freedom, of a world without chains, without whips. I would close my eyes and cling to her voice as if it could carry me far away from that place. I remember her smile, a smile she forced even with tired eyes, cracked skin, and a fragile body. She smiled so I wouldn't be afraid. She used to say, "It will pass, my son. One day it will pass." But the days were always the same. The sun would rise and we would go to work. Small children with holes in our hands, carrying buckets, scrubbing floors, getting beaten if we spilled a single drop of water. Some days the master would yell, telling us to run faster, work harder, and when we couldn't take it anymore, punishment would come. The sound of the chains, I never forgot that. The noise of them dragging on the ground, clanging against each other like a sad song playing all day long. From time to time, one of the adults would be chained and we would watch with wide, frightened eyes, not fully understanding but feeling the fear growing inside us. And when night came, we returned to the slave quarters, tired, bodies aching, stomachs empty, hearts heavy with sadness. My mother would hold me, stroke my back, and all I wanted was to sleep, to forget, even if only for a few hours, that world that only brought us pain. Our clothes were rags, scraps of old cloth that barely covered our bodies. Some days the cold would cut through us, and we had nothing to wear. My mother tried to sew the fabric pieces, making something like a blanket, but it was never enough and never for everyone. Water was another battle. We drank from a well, muddy water, tasting like dirt. But it was all we had, and it was better to drink than to feel our mouths dry, our throats burning with thirst. I remember the sounds of the crickets, the hooting of the owls, and the screams of people being beaten in the middle of the night, cutting through the silence, making us curl up, cover our ears, and pretend we weren't hearing. And even so, in the middle of so much pain, my mother found strength to teach me to hope, to not let hate consume me, to dream of a different tomorrow. It was with her, in that slave hut, on that cold floor, hungry, scared, that I learned what resistance meant, what love meant, what it meant to be strong even when the whole world seemed to want to destroy me. That was my childhood, a childhood of mud, tears, struggle, but also of a mother who, even with so little, gave me everything she could. The small amount of love that still fit in that place of pain. I always thought that with time the scars would fade, that the skin would heal, that the body would forget. But no, they're still here, each one like a memory written in my flesh, like a story my skin never let me erase. The first time I felt a whip, I was only about 8 years old, maybe less. Back then no one cared to count the exact age of a black boy in the slave quarters. We were counted by task, by strength, not by years of life. I remember it like it was today. The reason, a bucket of water I spilled while cleaning the floor of the big house. The master didn't think twice, called the overseer, and I, with trembling legs, was dragged to the whipping post. The post was a thick piece of wood stuck in the middle of the yard where everyone could see. The place of humiliation, the altar of suffering. My mother tried to protect me. She knelt, cried, begged, but it was no use. The overseer came with that whip, the one they called bacahau, that looked more like a snake, thick, with multiple ends, cutting the skin and leaving the flesh open. Every time the leather came down, I screamed. My body shook. The blood ran hot down my back, mixed with my tears. After that day, I learned to hide my crying, not out of pride, but out of survival, because those who cried too much got beaten more. The master said it was to toughen us up, and I toughened up on the outside, because inside, each mark was a piece of my soul being torn apart. There was punishment for everything. For spilling food, for talking back, for looking a white person in the eyes, even for breathing too loudly. And the worst was the punishment with no reason. The one that came just because the master or the overseer woke up in a bad mood, or wanted to show power, to remind us that our lives were worth nothing. The worst of all was the chain punishment. One night, after a long day working in the fields, I was sitting quietly, leaning against the wall of the slave quarters, my eyes half closed, trying to rest, when the overseer passed by, thought I looked lazy, and told me to get up. I, exhausted, took a few seconds too long, and that was enough. He grabbed me by the arm, dragged me to the shed, and chained me up, arms stretched upward, hands tied, body hanging, with only the tips of my toes touching the ground. I stayed like that all night, without sleep, without food, with throbbing muscles, burning joints, and my head spinning from pain, thirst, hunger, and fear. When they let me go, I could barely walk. My hands were numb, my wrists bruised, my skin torn. My mother carried me in her arms, brought me back to the slave quarters like I was a baby again. She, with tears running down her face, but with the strength of a lioness, applied herbs to my wounds, made wet cloth compresses, blew on my back as if her breath could heal the world. I asked her that night why they did that to us, and she, looking me in the eyes, said with a trembling voice, "Because they're afraid that we'll forget we're captives, afraid that we'll want to be free." The punishments weren't just physical, there were psychological ones too. The humiliation, the disdain, the looks of disgust, the words that cut more than the whip, animal, filthy Negro, thing. That's what we heard all day long. They made us feel less than human, made us doubt whether we even had a soul. And when the slave tried to escape and got caught, the punishment became a spectacle. Everyone had to watch. The overseer would tie the poor soul face down, and each lash came with a scream and the blood gushing, splashing on the ground. Some people fainted before the 20th strike, but the overseer kept going until his arm gave out. One day I saw a man, one of the oldest in the quarters, die there under the whip, and the master, instead of feeling pity, said, "One less mouth to feed." Those words stayed engraved in my mind as if carved with a knife. The women, my mother included, had another kind of punishment. They were taken inside the big house and came back with hollow eyes, torn clothes, and a lost stare. We knew, but no one had the courage to speak. Their pain was silent, buried deep, hidden behind a forced smile so their children wouldn't notice. And so I grew up with a marked body, calloused skin, and a soul stitched together on the inside, trying not to fall apart completely. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see the scars, every line, every mark, and I remember everything. They are like maps, pots drawn on my skin, telling each chapter of a story that, no matter how much I want, I will never be able to forget. Some nights, even today, I wake up startled with the sound of a whip echoing in my head, as if it were coming down again, as if time had never passed. But even with all this, I'm here, breathing, telling, and every time I speak, it's like I tear a bit of this pain away and throw it into the world for everyone to hear, so no one will ever forget what we lived through. There was one thing, just one, that gave us the strength to keep breathing in that place. The dream of freedom. It was at night, always at night, when the silence of the plantation was broken only by the sound of crickets, the wind in the trees, and sometimes a lost cry coming from a nearby slave hut. It was at that hour, after a whole day of work, punishment, hunger, and pain, that we started whispering softly, barely moving our lips, as if telling a secret to our own hearts, the elders. Those who had seen more suns and more deaths than I could imagine were the first to start talking. They told stories of others who had escaped, who had crossed forests, rivers, and disappeared into the night, leaving behind only memories and the hope that, somewhere, they were free. I lay there, eyes wide open, listening to every word as if they were diamonds falling from the sky. My mother sometimes pulled me to a corner, laid my head on her lap, and began to tell, softly, in my ear, stories of quilombos, of lands where black people walked without chains, where children could play, where mothers could raise their children without fear of losing them from one day to the next. She spoke of Zumbi, of Palmares, of men and women who had escaped, fought, survived, and built their own homes, their own pieces of world. I didn't really understand who Zumbi was, or where Palmares was, but in my mind, all of that became a beautiful image, a place where the sun rose differently, where the air didn't smell like mold, and where our hands didn't bleed from forced labor. The conversations were so quiet that we learned to listen with our hearts. Any noise, any step, any rustle made everyone fall silent instantly, because if the overseer found out, the punishment was doubled. Talking about freedom was a greater crime than stealing, than disobeying, than anything else. Even so, we talked because the dream that they could never take from us. There was an old man, Raimundo, who liked to say that the dream was the last piece of land the master could never take. He told, with shining eyes, that when he was young, he had seen people escape, cross kilometers of forest, face wild animals, cold, hunger, just so they wouldn't die as slaves. And he, with his callous fingers, drew invisible maps in the palm of his hand, showing us the paths, the shortcuts, the streams where we could drink water, the hiding places among the rocks, the signs on the trees that pointed north. I remember that, from time to time, one of us would disappear from one day to the next. The straw mat would be empty. No one said anything, but deep down, everyone knew. They had tried to escape. We hoped with all our strength that brother, that sister, had made it, had left behind the pain, the post, the whip, the fear. But many times, hope turned to sadness, because days later, the overseer would return, dragging the body, battered or, worse, lifeless. And then, silence took over again. A heavy silence that stuck in our throats like a knot that not even crying could untie. My mother had a look that changed every time someone was caught trying to escape, a look mixed with pain and decision, as if inside her, each failure increased her desire to see her son far from there, alive, breathing freedom. The nights were the only moments we could dream. We looked at the sky, at that sea of stars, and wondered, on the other side of the forest, are there people looking at the same stars, but with free feet, with light souls? The elders said yes, that there were such people, that there were places where black men could walk without being watched, could sing without fear, could build homes, plant food, raise their children, love, smile, live. There were nights when my mother would wake me up in the middle of sleep, just to take me to the door of the slave quarters so I could look at the moon. She said, "Look, my son, see out there? Freedom lives beyond those trees, past that horizon, beyond that mountain range." And I, just a boy, would look and dream, imagining myself running through the forest, barefoot but without chains, without the overseer shouting behind, without the whip on my back. We also talked about how the day would come when everything would change. Some said an army would come to free everyone at once. Others believed the masters would get tired and let us go. and some believed the only way was to escape at dawn. With the moon as witness and the heart guiding the steps, I learned, in those whispering nights, to have faith, even when everything seemed lost. My mother prayed softly, asked for strength, protection, asked the saints, the oryxes, any force from the heavens, so that one day I could have a life different from hers. One night, she looked at me with eyes full of tears and said, "If one day you manage it, go without looking back. Even if my heart stays here, even if my soul dies a little, I want you to live. I want you to be free." Those words stayed engraved inside me like a promise, like a mother's command that we know we must obey. And so, night after night, conversation after conversation, dream after dream, something grew inside me. A desire, a courage, a need to breathe different air, to live another life, to break those chains, even if with my own hands. Freedom became an obsession, and the more I heard the stories, the more I saw the invisible maps drawn in the hands of the elders, the more I felt the fear, the more I fed my hope, because deep down, I knew that one day, that night would come, the night when I would run without looking back, with trembling legs, a heart exploding, and hope screaming louder than fear. I never thought, never, that the day to escape would really come. For years, those midnight whispers, those stories about people who ran, who faced forests, wild animals, slave hunters, always seemed like distant dreams, like courage belonging to others, people stronger, bolder, more desperate than me. But the day came, and when it came, it hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't like the stories. There was no warning, no well-drawn plan, not even time to take a deep breath and think twice. It happened on a new moon night, one of those when the darkness takes over everything, when you can't even see the palm of your own hand. The sky was black, the air heavy, suffocating, as if nature itself knew something was about to happen. The day before had been worse than usual. The overseer, drunk on cachaca, decided to beat one of the boys from the quarters just because the poor kid tripped while carrying sacks of corn. I, who always tried to stay quiet, ended up getting involved, tried to pull the boy away, protect him with my body. That was enough. I got 3 lashes right there, in the middle of the yard, in front of everyone. My skin burned, the blood ran hot. But the worst part was seeing my mother's face, her on her knees, hands raised, begging, crying, praying for them to stop that night, while she tended to my wounds with the same old cloth as always, with herb leaves she hid under the straw. I felt a weight, a tiredness, a desperation I'd never felt before. It was like, if I didn't do something, I was going to die right there, like that, without even knowing what it felt like to really live. That's when I heard one of the older men, Joaquim, called me to the corner, whispered in my ear about a group that was going to try to escape that very night. 3 men, and maybe me too. My heart raced, my hands sweated. I looked at my mother. She was asleep sitting up, leaning against the wall, her body exhausted, her hands calloused, her face marked by pain and a hard life. I knew that if I left, she would stay. She no longer had the strength to run. Her knees couldn't take it. Her body was weak, her lungs constantly wheezing. She always said, "My freedom now is seeing you free." In that moment, a battle started inside me. Part of me wanted to lie back down, forget the idea, wait for the next day, pretend nothing was happening. But the other part, the one carrying all those years of pain, punishment, hunger, screamed for me to get up, to run, to not miss the chance. I stayed there, frozen, legs shaking. Looking at her for long minutes, time felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath. I got really close to her, knelt down, rested my head on her lap, slowly, so I wouldn't wake her. Her smell, the same as always, sweat, earth, crushed leaves, mixed with that unique mother's affection. I whispered, almost without sound, just moving my lips, "Forgive me, Mother, forgive me." I stood up, heart pounding, tears already falling even before I took the first step. I went to the corner of the quarters where the others were waiting for me. Everything was ready, or at least as ready as something like this could be, each with a piece of hard bread, a gourd with water, and most importantly, the courage, that desperate courage that comes when life pushes you to the edge of the abyss. Before leaving, I looked back one last time. My mother, still sleeping, her face peaceful, as if deep down she knew, as if she felt that this night would be the last. We crawled out, stomachs on the ground, carefully, avoiding any noise. We passed behind the shed, avoided the big house, jumped the fence, and entered the dense forest. The smell of wet earth, the sound of leaves, the cold cutting the skin, every step was a risk. Every branch that snapped sounded like thunder in the night. My chest hurt, not just from fear, but for her, knowing that while I was running, she was there, alone, not knowing, or maybe knowing. We ran all night without stopping. From time to time, one of the men whispered, "Faster, faster." We heard the dogs far away, their barking echoing, and every time I heard it, my blood froze. There were moments I thought of turning back, of dropping everything, running back to her arms. But then, her face came to my mind with that look, that silent plea, "Go, my son, go." And I went. When the sun began to rise, we were still, deep in the woods, our bodies scratched, feet wounded, stomachs empty, but our hearts beating strong, telling us that, at least for now, we were still free. On that first day, hidden under a pile of leaves, I cried. I cried from exhaustion, fear, guilt, and longing, but mostly, I cried because, for the first time in my life, I was far from the quarters. The taste of freedom was bitter, painful, full of guilt, but at the same time, it was the cleanest air I had ever breathed. And even with all the fear, with all the pain, I knew I had done what she wanted, what she had always wanted, to be free, for her, for me, for everyone who stayed behind. The first thing we learn when running away is that silence can save our lives. The second is that our own heart becomes an enemy because it beats so hard, so loud. It feels like everyone around can hear it. We ran all night as if we had the devil on our backs. The moon, almost hidden behind the clouds, barely let us see where we stepped. Every branch, every stone, every root on the ground was a trap waiting to trip us. I stumbled, fell, got up, without even feeling pain. Fear was bigger than everything. The other 3 men with me were older, more experienced, had been through other escape attempts before. Joaquin, who led the group, went ahead, clearing the path with his hands, pushing branches aside, signaling with gestures when it was time to stop, to duck, to wait. Behind us, the sounds of the farm grew more distant, but at the same time, the barking of dogs seemed to get closer. It was like the sound traveled faster than our legs. At every stop, we pressed our ears to the ground, trying to hear footprints, the overseer's shouts, the sound of boots on the trail. Joaquin, with his eyes fixed on the horizon, whispered, "They'll send the dogs. They'll follow the trail. We have to cross the river before dawn." And that's what we tried to do. The forest was dense, thick, a dark green labyrinth. The branches scratched our skin, the grass cut our legs, mosquitoes bit mercilessly. But no one complained. The fear of being caught, of going back, of tasting the whip again was stronger than any pain. From time to time, one of us would stop, point to a sign, a trail, a footprint, a crushed plant. We followed instincts, trusting the marks of nature and Joaquim's memories. The air was humid, heavy, and the smell of wet earth mixed with sweat, with the blood from open wounds, with the scent of adrenaline itself. In the middle of the night, as we crawled over a rocky slope, we heard the first clear sign that they were after us. The dog sounds closer, fiercer, as if they smelled us, as if they could see us even in the dark. Joaquim turned to us, eyes wide, and whispered urgently, "Now there's no choice. Run. Run as fast as you can." And that's what we did. We slid down the slope like we were falling, stumbling, rolling, branches cutting our faces, mud sticking to our skin, clothes tearing. The other two men, Pedro and Antonio, ran ahead. I followed close behind, chest burning, gasping for air, mind fixed on, I can't stop, I can't stop, I can't stop. Down below, finally, the sound of water, the river, the same river that had been described many times during conversations in the slave quarters as salvation. The line separating captivity from freedom. Without thinking, without measuring, we threw ourselves in. The cold water cut our skin, took our breath, but at the same time brought desperate relief. Swimming, crossing, was the only chance. Every stroke was a fight because our bodies were already tired, exhausted, hurting. The fear of drowning, of being swept away by the current, was huge. But the fear of being caught, of going back, was bigger. On the other side, we dragged ourselves through the mud, heavy clothes, chest heaving, muscles trembling. Joaquim, hands on his knees, looked back at the river and said through clenched teeth, "At least the dogs will lose the trail for a while." But time was short. We barely had time to catch our breath before moving again, now into an even thicker forest, slippery ground, roots grabbing at our feet, insects attacking our skin relentlessly. The night sounds, which before were just part of the landscape, now became a constant threat. The snap of a branch, the distant call of an animal, the rustling of leaves, everything seemed like a warning of danger. At every noise, we stopped, held our breath, ears alert, waiting for the worst. Near dawn, we heard voices, human voices mixed with dogs barking and the muffled sound of hurried steps. They were there, in the forest, hunting us like animals. Joaquim, eyes full of fear but voice firm, told us to climb a tree. Each of us chose a trunk, and we stayed there, curled up, hidden among the branches, bodies aching, muscles locked, hearts pounding. I, holding onto the trunk, eyes wide, could see the torches passing far off, overseers shouting, dogs sniffing the ground, the sound of leaves being stirred by them. Time seemed to stop. Minutes turned into hours. Sweat ran into my eyes, mixed with tears I didn't even know were falling. Every step they took just meters away, fear grew. I remembered my mother. The last time I saw her sleeping, her plea, her look. Inside me, a silent but strong prayer grew. I begged all the saints, all the Erixes, all the forces of nature, that they would pass by without looking up, that they wouldn't notice us there. And by some miracle, that's what happened. After what seemed like an eternity, the sound of footsteps grew distant, the dogs farther away, until only the noise of crickets and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind remained. We climbed down from the trees, bodies stiff, legs shaky, but with a strange feeling, a mix of relief and terror, because the hunt wasn't over. It had just moved. We moved on, not really knowing where, only trusting the stars, the signs. In the forest, and the will to survive. The forest was both shelter and trap during the day. The sun barely pierced the treetops, and we rested a little, just enough not to faint. Real sleep was impossible. At night, we walked, always alert, hearts pounding in our throats, breath held tight. Every leaf that moved, every snapping branch made our bodies freeze. Every time the wind shifted and brought the smell of smoke, we knew they were still nearby. That's how it went, day after day, night after night. The escape continued, and with every step, the longing for my mother squeezed my chest. Her image, alone in the slave quarters, haunted me. But at the same time, the promise not to go back, not to be caught, to live, made me keep going, because now I wasn't running just for myself. I was running for her, for all who stayed behind, for all who still dreamed, hidden in whispered nights of the day they too could be free. The first days after the escape were the hardest of my life. When we think of freedom, only beautiful images come to mind. Open sky, wind on the face, a future far from the slave quarters. But what came was hunger, cold, exhaustion, and the constant fear of dying before even knowing what it truly meant to live. The forest, which from afar seemed like shelter, up close was a treacherous enemy during the day. The sun barely passed through the treetops. The ground was always damp, smelling of wet earth and rotting leaves. The air was heavy, stifling, hard to breathe. We walked with our bodies leaning forward, dodging branches and vines, eyes always alert to any movement. But it was at night that the real terror began. Without fire, so as not to reveal our presence, we faced the cold of the early morning only with our own bodies. We huddled close to each other, trying to share the little warmth that remained. Our clothes, torn and wet with sweat and dew, stuck to our skin, increasing the discomfort. Hunger is something I will never forget. At first, we still had some dry breadcrumbs left and a little water in our gourds, but soon that ran out. Then despair came. We searched for roots, leaves, fruits that we didn't even know if they were poisonous or not. One day, Pedro ate a small red fruit he found on the ground. In less than an hour, he began vomiting, shaking, his eyes sunken, his body sweating cold. We stayed there, not knowing what to do, just watching, afraid he would die right there in front of us. Joaquim, with all his life experience, ran to a nearby stream, brought water, made him drink slowly, and then, with leaves from a bitter plant he said he knew, tried to counteract the poison. Pedro survived, but was weak, with shaky legs, unable to walk properly for 2 days. From then on, we only ate what Joaquim said was safe. Roots tasting like dirt, bitter leaves, and occasionally some fruit he recognized. But it was always little, very little. Our stomachs growled all the time. It felt like they had been empty for centuries. Besides hunger, fear was another constant companion we could not shake. Every sound in the forest, every branch snap, every different bird call made us freeze. One day, we heard human voices from far away, low but unmistakable. Overseers, slave hunters. We didn't know. We only knew we had to get out of there as fast as possible. We ran and hid in a hole in the middle of a ravine, covered with leaves and mud, hearts pounding, waiting. The voices passed, and we stayed there silently, without moving a muscle, for hours, afraid they would come back. Those nights, I dreamed of my mother. I dreamed she called me softly, telling me to come back, to have the thin porridge she always made on the coldest mornings. I would wake with wet eyes, but no time to cry properly. Water was another problem. When we found a stream, we drank as if it were the last drop of life. But we knew drinking straight from the source, without knowing if it was clean, could bring disease. Still, the fear of thirst was greater than the fear of falling ill. To sleep, we chose the most hidden spots, under trees with thick roots, inside bushes, sometimes even in holes dug with our own hands. The ground was hard, cold, covered with insects. Ants bit nonstop, and mosquitoes turned our skin into a map of welts. One early morning, a snake almost bit Antonio. He had laid down near some rocks and in the dark didn't see the animal approaching. His scream woke everyone up. Joaquin, quick as someone who had faced worse things, grabbed a stick and drove the snake away before the worst happened. But the scare stayed, and the fear only grew. Each morning we woke weaker, thinner, eyes sunken, bodies covered in scratches, bites, open wounds. But despite everything, the will to keep going, not to return, to survive, was what kept us standing. Time in that forest seemed meaningless. We didn't know if it was Tuesday, Friday, Sunday, if 3 days, 5, or more than a week had passed. Our bodies' marks were the only calendar we had. Joaquin, always in front, said that if we kept going in that direction, we would reach a Colombo, a place where others like us had taken refuge, where maybe we could finally breathe in peace, at least for a while. But to get there, we still had a long way ahead, and each new dawn brought a new challenge. One morning the sky woke differently, with a heavy mist that made us see nothing beyond the steps ahead. Joaquin said that was good. It made the pursuit harder, but for us it meant more stumbles, more falls, more branches cutting our skin. The fear of dying there without ever having truly known freedom was constant, but the will to keep going was stronger. And even with our bodies begging for rest, with our heads throbbing from hunger, with our eyes heavy with sleep, we kept going, because returning was never an option, and because inside each of us there was a flame, small, weak, but still burning, the flame of hope. When we heard the first drumbeat, my whole body shuddered. It was a deep, heavy sound, as if coming from inside the earth, like the ground itself had a beating heart. I had never heard that kind of drumbeat before, but something inside me recognized. It was as if, for the first time, the sound said, "Come, you have a place." We followed the sound with careful steps, still suspicious, still afraid it might be a trap. Joaquin, with a steady look, signaled for us to go slowly, alert to every movement in the bushes. After so much time running, with weak bodies, sore feet, and heads spinning from hunger, any sign of hope seemed like a dream. But even tired, we kept going. The sound of the drums grew louder, more rhythmic, until suddenly the trees began to open, and we saw, for the first time, the Colombo. It was different from everything I had imagined. The houses, made of clay and wood, with straw roofs, were ranged in a circle as if protecting each other. In the center, a fire burned, smoke rising slowly, carrying the smell of burning wood mixed with the aroma of food in the air, a strong scent of beans, meat, and spices that made my stomach growl loudly, almost uncontrollably. There were people everywhere, men, women, children, all with skin marked by sun and struggle but eyes alive, with a different kind of light. It was a mix of faces, some scarred, some with braided hair, others with war paint on their faces. When they saw us, there were no questions, no suspicion. A woman, wearing a simple dress and strong arms, approached, looked at us closely, and said only, "You've arrived, now you're home." Those words made me cry for the first time since the escape. Tears came thick and hot, mixed with the mud on my face, sweat, and road dust. I cried without shame, like a child, while others also knelt, relieved and exhausted. Soon other women came, bringing water, food, and clean cloths for us to cover ourselves. One man, tall with white hair but still strong, introduced himself as Emancipation, the leader of the Quilombo. He looked at us with a mix of sternness and warmth and said, "Here, you are free, but freedom has its price. Here, we work, we fight, we defend what is ours. If you want to stay, you have to be ready." We listened with respect. After all we had been through, we were ready for anything except to return to the slave quarters. The following days were for recovery. We slept like we hadn't slept in weeks, lying on straw mats, smelling the earth but with lighter hearts. The food, simple but abundant, felt like a feast. Every spoonful of porridge, every piece of meat was savored as if it were the last. With time, we learned the rules of the place. The Quilombo was organized, with tasks divided. Some took care of the crops, others hunted, some did security, patrolling the surroundings, always alert to any danger. I, still weak, started by helping carry water from the river, then learned to plant, harvest, and work the land. Pedro, still recovering from poisoning, was responsible for caring for the little ones, helping teach the children to identify safe. Plants, knowledge Joaquim insisted on passing along. At night, we gathered around the fire. There, stories were told, each with their pain, memories, and traumas. Some spoke of escapes, families left behind, others told of battles, ambushes, against slave catchers, victories, and defeats. It was on one of those nights that I spoke for the first time about my mother. I told how I left her behind, the weight I carried in my chest, her last look before I left. The women listened silently, eyes full of tears, some with similar stories of lost children, mothers never found again. Zaymashas, after listening, came over, placed a strong hand on my shoulder, and said, "Here, you've gained another family, but the longing, that only time and struggle will help heal." In the days that followed, we learned the importance of silence. The Quilombo stayed hidden, surrounded by natural traps, but always threatened. Sometimes news came of nearby plantations organizing hunting expeditions. When that happened, everyone hid, women, children, elders, while the fighters prepared to defend. One morning, I woke to the sound of a horn. It was an alarm. Everyone ran to the meeting points. I stayed with the women and children, hidden in a pit covered with leaves, heart pounding, while the elders, with spears, machetes, and even stones, prepared to face whoever came. Luckily, the alarm was false, but it showed us that even in the Quilombo, peace was always fragile. Despite that, moments of joy existed on Sundays. When it was safe, we made circles to dance, sing, and play music. There, I saw an Atabac drum played up close for the first time and felt the music's vibration in my feet, hands, and chest. I learned songs I had never heard before but seemed to live inside me forever, and little by little, I began to smile. Again. Life in the Quilombo was hard, but it was ours. For the first time, I could walk without chains on my feet, look at the sky, breathe deeply, and feel that I was my own master. The hardest thing was still dealing with missing my mother. Many nights I stared at the stars, wondering where she was, if she was still alive, if she still thought of me, if she prayed for my protection. Joaquim, always with that look of someone who has seen too much, once came close and said, "The freedom we have here is also for them, for those left behind, for those still suffering there." That stayed in my mind, and it was then that, for the first time, I began to think about going back, not to the slave quarters, not to be caught, but to try to do what many had done before, help others escape, save whoever I could, maybe even my mother. But that is another part of my story. When we heard the first drum beat, my whole body trembled. It was a deep, heavy sound, as if coming from inside the earth, like the ground itself had a beating heart. I had never heard that kind of drum before, but something inside me recognized. It was as if, for the first time, the sound said, "Come, you have a place." We followed the sound with careful steps, still suspicious, still afraid it might be a trap. Joachim, with a steady gaze, signaled for us to move slowly, alert to every movement in the forest. After so much time running, with weak bodies, wounded feet, and heads spinning from hunger, any sign of hope felt like a dream. But even tired, we kept going. The drums grew louder, more rhythmic, until suddenly the trees began to open and we saw, for the first time, the Quilombo. It was different from everything I had imagined. The houses, made of clay and wood with straw roofs, were arranged in a circle as if protecting one another. In the center, a fire burned, smoke rising slowly, carrying the scent of burning wood mixed with the aroma of food in the air. A strong smell of beans, meat, and spices that made my stomach growl uncontrollably. There were people everywhere, men, women, children, all with skin marked by sun and struggle, but with bright eyes, a different kind of light. It was a mix of faces, some scarred, others with braided hair, others with war paint on their faces. When they saw us, there were no questions or suspicion. A woman, wearing a simple dress and strong arms, approached, looked closely at us, and simply said, "You have arrived. Now, you are home." Those words made me cry for the first time since the escape. Tears came thick and warm, mixed with the mud on my face, with sweat, with the dust from the road. I cried without shame, like a child, while others also knelt down, relieved and exhausted. Soon, other women came, bringing water, food, clean cloths for us to cover ourselves. One of the men, tall, with white hair but still strong, introduced himself as Zaymashas, the leader of the Quilombo. He looked at us with a mix of toughness and warmth and said, "Here, you are free, but freedom also has its price. Here, we work, we fight, we defend what is ours. If you want to stay, you have to be ready." We listened with respect after all we had been through. We were ready for anything but to go back to the slave quarters. The following days were for recovery. We slept like we hadn't in weeks, lying on straw mats, smelling the earth but feeling lighter at heart. The food, simple but abundant, seemed like a feast. Every spoonful of porridge, every piece of meat was savored as if it were the last. Over time, we learned the rules of the place. The Quilombo was organized, with tasks divided. Some cared for the crops, others hunted, some guarded and patrolled the surroundings, always alert to any sign of danger. I, still weak, started helping carry water from the river, then learned to plant, harvest, and work the land. Pedro, still recovering from poisoning, took care of the little ones, helping teach children to identify safe plants, knowledge Joachim insisted on passing on to everyone. At night, we gathered around the fire. Stories were told, each with their pain, memories, and traumas. Some spoke of escapes, families left behind, others recounted battles, ambushes on slave catchers, victories, and defeats. It was on one of those nights that I spoke of my mother for the first time. I told how I left her behind, the weight on my chest, her last look before I left. The women listened silently, eyes full of tears, some with similar stories of lost children, of mothers never reunited. They mashas, after hearing, came to me, placed his strong hand on my shoulder, and said, "Here, you found another family, but the longing, only time and struggle will help heal that." In the following days, we learned the importance of silence. The Quilombo lived hidden, surrounded by natural traps, but always threatened. Sometimes news came of nearby plantations, organizing hunting expeditions. When that happened, everyone hid, women, children, the elders, while the fighters prepared to defend. One morning, I woke to the sound of a horn. It was the alert signal. Everyone ran to their spots. I stayed with the women and children, hiding in a pit covered with leaves, heart pounding, while the elders, armed with spears, machetes, and even stones, prepared to face whoever came. Luckily, the alarm was false, but it showed that even in the Quilombo, peace was always fragile. Despite that, moments of joy existed on Sundays when it was safe. They held circles for dance, music, and singing. There I saw an ataback, drum being played up close for the first time. Felt the vibration of the music in my feet, hands, and chest. I learned songs I had never heard, but that seemed to live inside me forever. And little by little, I began to smile again. Life in the Quilombo was hard, but it was ours. For the first time, I could walk without chains on my feet, look up at the sky, breathe deeply, and feel that here, I was master of myself. The hardest part was still dealing with missing my mother. Many nights I stared at the stars, wondering where she was, if she was still alive, if she still thought of me, if she prayed for my protection. Joaquim, always with that look of someone who's seen too much, once came up and said, "The freedom we have here is also for them, for those who stayed, for those still suffering there." That stayed in my head, and that's when, for the first time, I began to think about going back, not to the slave quarters, not to get caught, but to try to do what many had done before, help others escape, save whoever I could, maybe even my mother. But that's another part of my story. The first step outside the Quilombo was like crossing an invisible door that separated life from death. The forest, which had once been a shelter, now seemed like a disguised enemy. Every broken branch, every rustling leaf made me stop, hold my breath, look around like a cornered animal. I knew the way back would be more dangerous than the escape on the way out. Desperation made me run, made me take risks almost without thinking. But now, I carried a mission, and any mistake could cost me my life and the chance to try to save hers. The sun had barely risen when I began the crossing. I followed the bed of a creek, walking in the water to avoid leaving tracks. The cold water cut my ankles, but it was better that way than leaving easy footprints for the slave hunters. I slept on tree stumps, hidden among roots, and ate little, just enough not to faint. The nights were the worst. The darkness seemed to have eyes. Sounds of animals mixed with the echo of my own footsteps. I was afraid of running into jaguars, snakes, but the biggest fear was crossing paths with armed men who hunted people like me as if we were animals. One late afternoon, almost out of strength, I found an old fallen log. I sat down there trying to catch my breath when I heard, far away, the sound of a horse, frozen. I hid among the bushes, held my breath, and only after many minutes, when the sound faded away, did I start walking again. Days went by like that, marching with a tired body, but a mind focused on one thought: reach the farm, find my mother, and get her out of there at any cost. Along the way, I found footprints of other fugitives, recent marks on the soft earth. I felt a mix of hope and fear. Were they alive? Had they been caught to be safe? I took another path, cutting through a denser part of the forest. The weather changed. The temperature dropped and a light drizzle started falling. My already torn clothes stuck to my body, making me even more vulnerable. But neither the cold nor the hunger was enough to stop me. When I finally got close to the farm, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. From afar, I could see the sugarcane fields, the barns, and in the distance, the cursed slave quarters. Memories came rushing back. There I was, small, carrying sacks, getting beaten, crying and hiding, while she, my mother, did everything to protect me. I spent hours watching from afar, lying in the middle of the bushes, eyes just above the leaves like a hunter. I counted how many overseers passed by, observed the guard shifts, the moments when activity lessened. That night, the moon was covered, which helped me hide better. I crawled until I got near the corral, where I used to bring water for the animals. The smell of wet earth mixed with the old sweat of the slave quarters invaded my nostrils, bringing a wave of hard-to-control memories. I saw some women leaving the slave quarters, carrying buckets to the well. My heart raced. I looked at each one hoping to recognize her face, but none was my mother. I waited a bit longer until, in a burst of courage, I decided to take a risk. I moved to a nearby tree and lightly threw a small stone toward the barracks where the women slept. It was an old code some of us used when we wanted to talk to someone without drawing attention. From inside, a woman came out with a scared look. When she saw me, she almost screamed, but I put my finger to my lips begging for silence. It was Dona Lourdes, an old friend of my mother's. She recognized me immediately, without wasting time. She whispered, "She's alive, but she's sick, very weak, can barely stand." My world stopped. Fear turned into despair, but at the same time, hope reignited. Knowing she was still breathing was all I needed. Dona Lourdes, with an anxious look, ranged with me away to find my mother the next early morning, when the overseers would be sleeping heavily after their usual cachaca. I went back to the forest waiting for the time, nerves on edge and heart full of a mixture of fear, anxiety, and the certainty that now there was no turning back. I knew the next night would be the most important of my life. If this story has moved you this far, if you also believe that the fight for freedom, love, and justice must never be forgotten, subscribe to the channel. Here, with every new video, I bring strong, true stories that touch the soul and tell the stories the world tried to erase.